shaft.
In the last episode, I sorted out a whole load of small jobs that needed to be done in order to run the wiring to them. Since the last episode, I have reassembled the wiper motor, so with that out of the way, we can now move on to sorting out the last few things that are required before the wiring is complete.
This is the mini switch panel, and if I'm going to be honest, it does a perfectly good job. All the switches work and they do exactly as they're supposed to. The issues lie, however, with this control here, which is for the heater, and this control here, which is for the choke. Now, for any of our younger members who are too young to remember vehicles with manual chokes, what the choke does is it richens a fuel mixture to allow an engine to start more easily. I have two issues with this choke. One is jammed and doesn't work anymore, and the second is I've gone and fitted an engine with fuel injection, so it's actually no longer required. If you cast your mind back to early episode when I was building the cooling system, you will remember me incorporating the Mini's original heater control valve into the cooling matrix. I did, however, move it from the driver's side of the engine to the passenger side, so this is now on the wrong side. First job we're going to do is remove this and fit it onto the opposite side. The cable for it is also in quite bad nick, so I'm actually going to replace it with a brand new one.
It was around about this point that I realised I couldn't just swap the choke and heater controls around. Not only were the two holes different sizes and different shapes, the brackets that mount the switch panel to the dash rail are not the same thickness side to side, meaning the choke cable retaining clip wouldn't work. This left me with no option but to make some new brackets. As usual, the bracket started life as a cardboard template. One of the brackets required a hole with a flat in it, so once again out came the needle files. With the hole filed out to the correct shape, the outside edges of the bracket were given a little love with the flat disc on an angle grinder to get them into shape. I marked the position of the hole for the mounting stud after I bent the bracket into shape because it would have been almost impossible to get it in the right place had I done it beforehand. With the mounting stud hole drilled, it was then just a case of fitting the countersunk screw and welding it in place. With the one side bracket made out of 2mm steel, I then made the opposite side out of 1.2mm steel. As I said earlier, for some reason the sides are made from different thickness materials, and the new brackets needed to remain the same in order for the retaining clips to work. After drilling the bracket, it was then cut out before deburring, and the ends were rounded off using a flat disc. Once again, I marked the mounting stud hole after bending the bracket up and then welded the bolt to it. Due to the different size holes for the choke and heater cables in the switch panel, I had to machine a top hat shaped collar to take up the difference. This allowed the heater cable retaining nut to hold the heater cable in place, as well as centralise the left hand switch panel mounting bracket. With all the parts made and given a coat of satin black, it was then just a case of assembling the switch panel ready to go back into the car.
With the wiring run inside of the car, we can now look at where we're going to put the ECU. Now the ECU is going to live somewhere around here. However, when deciding where to mount the ECU, I've also got to consider where the radio mounts. The radio mounts underneath the dash rail there.
Well, this bit of footage aged really badly. First of all, for context, I filmed this back in January 2022. Yep, I really am that far behind in editing. Anyway, what I'm explaining here is that I gave a group of friends the option of which radio would be fit to the car. The options being the original 80s cassette deck or the mystery Russian radio that was purchased in the city of Keremovo when I did the Mongol Rally back in 2019. I'll let you guess which one they picked. Had I asked them a couple of months later, I'm fairly sure they would have made a different choice. Anyway, regardless of what radio gets fitted to the Mini, the mounting of it is linked to where I can position the ECU.
Let's get some brackets made to mount this in there.
Apologies for the piles of rubble visible in the background and some of the slightly awkward positions that I'm having to work in. but my driveway had been dug up at the time as the Project Peddler's headquarters was getting some much needed upgrades. It's a good idea to put 45-degree chamfers on the corner of a part, especially if they're made out of sheet metal. This is so when you're working in close proximity to them, you don't end up catching and injuring the back of your hands. The second bracket made in much the same way, they were bolted to the ECU. Once bolted to the ECU along with its brackets were lined up in position in the car, and the positions of some existing holes in the Mini's dash rail were marked onto the brackets. It was then just a case of drilling the bracket and welding on some captive nuts.
This here is an aftermarket USB socket, 12 volt standard cigarette lighter socket, and a voltage gauge. Now, while these aren't original to the Mini, I do want to put them back in because for what I've got planned for this car, I'm probably going to need some way of charging a phone or powering a sat nav. The wiring on the back of it you might think is a bit chunky, and that's mainly because it's 2.5mm squared mains cable. This got wired, it did at approximately 2 AM of the day I had set off in the Mongol Valley, so it was a bit of a rush job. Now that we're redoing a lot of the wiring to the car though, I think we can do a better job, and I'd much rather have this as the standard automotive black and red colour scheme. So, we'll use this as a template because it's all the correct length, and rewire it.
These gauges and sockets mark the last of the major components that could be wired up off the car. So next I'm going to take you through all the small modifications and other miscellaneous things I had to do while wiring this car.
The first thing I did was remove all the power and alternator wiring from that lived around here. I also removed some of the sensor cables and fed them back through into the car. The two brown power cables that used to run from the back of the starter motor, which is what powered the rest of the Mini system, have been rerouted all the way back around here and now are terminated on a ring terminal that connects to the back of the starter motor. These feed power to a brand new fuse panel, which is a OEM Mini replacement one, and I've replugged that to solve a lot of the issues I had with a previously corroded terminal box. On the micro side, I've fitted everything up onto its bracket, plugged in all the connections underneath, and fed the loom back through the micro grommet here into the new bulkhead plate. The only thing we've had to modify with that loom is a set of cables that go down to a speedo sensor. There's also these three connections. Now I've purposely used these bullet connectors so I can identify them as something that's unmodified, because the colour system does not go from one side to the other. This green and white wire goes to this brown and green wire, which is the reverse lights, and it's the only set of lights on the Mini that are actually powered by the new fuse box from the Micro. The next is this black and red. Now this actually goes to a couple of brand new plugs that live down the back here, and that will ultimately go to the fuel pump. The fuel pump wiring is not wired yet into the side. I'm going to do that when I build the fuel system. After that, I've got this red and white wire which connects into this black and red wire. This is the start signal. This activates the starter relay, which is there, and that kicks the engine over. And finally, this white wire. This white wire goes to a spare terminal on the fuse panel under here. It's a bit hard to see, and that is a switched ignition. With the ignition switch set to the accessories, that powers a relay in here, which is labeled ignition, and that switches on this entire system. This entire system gets power via these couple of big white cables down here, which originally went to the Micro's battery, but now go to the back of the starter motor. There are also, it's very difficult to see, a couple of earth leads down here, and these bolt into what was the mounting point for a left-hand drive Mini's accelerator pedal. Very conveniently, British Leyland left me some welding and nuts, so I've used them. Other wiring modifications that I've made to this are brand new inline fuse holders, which power things like your hazard lights and the wiper motor, because my original ones were quite corroded. And then I've also terminated various earths down here, which one of them goes to the washer bottle, another goes to cigarette lighter socket and USB charging points that are inside the car, and a radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you my working sound system playing off of a USB stick. The actual radio works too. Unfortunately, due to copyright reasons, I'm not allowed to show you this, so you're just going to have to take my word for it.
I'm not going to explain how to wire up a radio. There's plenty of diagrams online. There's even one actually usually on the back of a radio. My radio is a standard DIN plug. It basically needs 12 volt power, switch 12 volt, ground, and your speakers wiring in. The only thing I will point out though is the wiring which comes from the Mini's fuse panel. You have this blue, it's very hard to see. There's a blue wire anyway underneath there that runs in. That is my 12 volt, and there's another blue wire. You got a lot of British Leyland's wiring is the 12 volt switch, which comes off from underneath where the white wire from the ignition goes. The radio has a fuse built into the back of it, so it does not need to go through the fuse in this. Other little electrical things I've done after feeding the Mini loom back through is I have fixed a dodgy hazard light switch by dismantling that and cleaning the terminals. And replaced the bulb in the fog light switch, which happened to blow. Spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was wrong with my rear fog light, and then realised actually there was nothing wrong with it. It was just a bulb indicating it was on. The washer bottle has also had to have its main power feed, which used to run around this side of the car, pass back round the other way. Fortunately, it was long enough to do. The only thing I had to do was lengthen out an earth cable.
And finally,
I've also fitted more modern weather pack connectors down here, because again my previous ones had corroded up, and that was a replacement to the original bullet connectors, which I couldn't for the life of me get apart. Those of you that have been watching since the beginning of this build will know that I haven't yet built the fuel system, so despite having the wiring in place, I'm not going to be able to get it to start. I'm guessing now there's a few of you are thinking, well go on then, suppose some easy start down the manifold or rig up a fuel system from a jerry can and get it going for us. Unfortunately there also lies a problem. Again, if you've been watching from the beginning, you will remember that there was no clutch or flywheel in this. So I can't even bump start it. And that means there's only one thing for it. This lot all has to come apart again. But that's not as bad as it sounds, because there are a few jobs that need to be done with the engine back out of the car. I really didn't want to start this job in the dark, but time is pressing, so cue the time lapse of me taking this all to pieces.
That's it for this episode and for wiring. Come back next time where we tackle another job to get the Mini one step closer to being back on the road. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please hit that like button and share. If you want to stay up to date with the build, then please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. And finally, you can check out my build thread on the Mini forum, where I sometimes post some behind the scene pictures. The link to my build thread is in the description below. Once again, thanks for watching.